Long before cities rose from the mud-brick plains of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians carved stories into wet clay. Stories they insisted came from beings far older than humanity, beings they called the Anunnaki. When you look closely at what they wrote, lines pressed with the precision of memory, a quiet question emerges beneath the myths. Were they simply describing gods? Or were they trying to warn us about something they believed would matter thousands of years later? Some tablets speak of creation, others speak of judgment, and a few, scattered across ruins from Eridu to Nippur, hint at consequences humanity once ignored. And before we walk deeper into that world, let me welcome you. I'm grateful you're here tonight, truly. If you're listening at the end of a long day or settling into the soft hush of your room, thank you for choosing to spend this quiet moment with me. We'll move gently, unhurried, as we explore these ancient whispers together. The mystery of the Anunnaki has fascinated scholars for more than a century. Archaeologists uncover tablets that describe them as divine judges, keepers of order, and watchers over human destiny. Historians interpret them as mythic reflections of natural forces or ancestral memory. Yet alternative researchers point to the consistency of the descriptions, the skyborne imagery, the warnings tied to floods, rebellion, imbalance. Some texts portray the Anunnaki as benefactors, others as enforcers. And in all of them, the Sumerians return again and again to a theme. There were rules to life on Earth, and consequences when those rules were ignored. Both perspectives, the scholarly and the speculative, deserve room to breathe tonight. Not to prove one right or the other wrong, but to understand why this ancient civilization felt compelled to preserve these stories with such devotion. We're not here to settle old debates. Instead, we're here to sit with the questions the Sumerians left behind, to feel the weight of their memory, and to wonder gently at what they believed humanity needed to remember. Every civilization leaves traces, warnings, hopes. What the Sumerians left behind is unusually structured, unusually precise, and unusually persistent across centuries of retelling. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders ease. Wherever you're listening from, a dim room, the corner of a quiet bed, or a soft couch, allow the air around you to settle. Think of clay warmed by the sun, the faint scent of bitumen, the low rustle of wind moving through reeds along the ancient Euphrates. You're safe here, and we'll move through this story together at a pace your mind can rest inside. And if this kind of gentle exploration helps you relax or helps you drift towards sleep, a simple like or subscribe supports this work and helps these long-form journeys reach others who might need them too. Thank you for considering it. Now, picture the world we're about to step into. A flat horizon stretching across southern Iraq, marsh birds stirring at dusk, a ziggurat rising like a stepped mountain above the plain. The first cities on Earth stood here, illuminated by oil lamps that flickered against walls of baked brick, cuneiform tablets dried beside hearths. Priests watched the slow crawl of stars across a velvet black sky, measuring patterns that shaped both calendar and myth. This was the world that shaped the Anunnaki stories, a world where the heavens felt close, where nature demanded respect, and where memory was carved with the intention of surviving ages. To understand their warnings, we must begin not with the gods, but with the land that taught the Sumerians how fragile life could be. When the last glacial cold slowly released its grip around 10,000 BCE, the lands that would one day cradle Sumer began to change in quiet, patient ways. Across the lower Tigris and Euphrates basin, meltwater carried silt from the Armenian highlands, spreading it like a veil over floodplains that had not yet known kings or temples. Wind moved steadily across open marshes, carrying the scent of wet reeds and brackish pools. The sky, unobstructed by architecture or smoke, felt impossibly wide, a vault of pale blue by day and a river of stars by night. You can almost imagine standing there, warm air brushing against your face, hearing nothing but distant birds and the slow lap of water. Long before the first clay tablet, this region was a crossroads of climate and geology. Seasonal floods swept through the low plains, leaving behind nutrient-rich soils that glittered faintly when sunlight struck embedded quartz. The marsh beds shifted from year to year as rivers wandered, carving new paths, then abandoning them. Rising from sediment like islands, small patches of firmer ground provided shelter for early foragers. Archaeologists studying sediment cores note alternating layers of clay, silt, and reed root fiber, evidence of ecosystems expanding and contracting in rhythm with changing temperatures. In this world, time was measured not by writing, but by the slow turning of celestial cycles overhead. Standing along one of these ancient riverbanks, you might hear the rustle of water birds lifting into the air, or feel the mud cool beneath bare feet. The humidity softened every sound, creating a muffled, serene quiet that wrapped the land. Early humans moved lightly across this terrain, gathering reeds, hunting small animals, and tracking seasonal fish movements. They knew the smell of fresh silt after a flood, the sharp fragrance of marsh grasses crushed underfoot, and the shimmering heat that rose from still water at midday. This was a world shaped by patience, not urgency. A world preparing, unknowingly, to host something extraordinary. When the Younger Dryas period finally stabilized, around 9600 BCE, rainfall patterns shifted eastward. The Fertile Crescent that ran from the Mediterranean to the Zagros, foothills supported wild wheat, barley, and lentils. Here in the southern reaches, however, the marshes dominated. The landscape encouraged cooperation. Families gathered along water margins, building shelters from bundled reeds tied with twisted fiber. Excavations at sites like Tel El Uwaili show compact dwellings, fireplaces lined with river pebbles, and pottery fragments tempered with chaff. People lived close to fire, water, and sky, three elements that would later infuse Sumerian spirituality. Across these plains, the stars became nightly companions. When the sky darkened, constellations sharpened, reflected in calm pools that formed after seasonal floods. The people watching those stars likely used them for navigation and tracking seasons, though no writing yet captured their interpretations. It's possible that stories formed around these celestial patterns long before they reached clay tablets. Early groups may have whispered myths around fires, attaching meaning to planetary movements or eclipses that startled the quiet marshland. Shadows passing across the moon would have felt like omens, stirring awe rather than fear. Where the Euphrates curved southward, new channels branched out like veins, carrying mineral-rich sediment toward the Gulf. Long before the coastline retreated northward, the sea reached deeper inland. Salt-tolerant plants lined the estuaries, their leaves catching light in muted green tones. The smell of salt mingled with freshwater silt, creating a layered scent unique to this region. Over thousands of years, as sea levels fluctuated, the shoreline crept backward. This gradual retreat opened new land for settlement, offering a canvas for the first experiments in agriculture. Evidence suggests that by 7000 BCE, Communities began manipulating water flow with low earthen embankments. These early efforts in irrigation were small, but they signaled something important. Humans were learning to partner with the rivers rather than simply endure them. Perhaps this shift changed how people thought about stability and continuity. They were no longer just surviving seasonal rhythms. They were beginning to shape them. The land responded. Harvests increased. Settlements grew. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the foundations of future cities settled into place. Walking through this ancient world in your imagination, you can sense how quiet it must have been. The only echoes were natural ones. Frogs calling from shallow pools. Reeds brushing against each other in steady breezes. Distant thunder rolling across open plains. Nights carried a cool touch, settling into the skin like a gentle reminder of the river's presence. During new moons, darkness felt complete, broken only by starlight scattered across the water. During full moons, shadows stretched long and soft, giving familiar shapes an otherworldly outline. It is within this quiet, reflective atmosphere that the seeds of future mythology began to take root. Maybe the earliest inhabitants sensed cycles in nature that felt larger than themselves, recognizing patterns in flooding and drought that repeated with cosmic regularity. Some scholars believe these patterns encouraged early forms of ritual, attempts to honor the forces shaping the world. Others propose that these rhythms simply taught people to watch the sky more carefully. Either way, the connection between earth and heavens deepened. And with this deepening came a readiness, a cultural openness to stories that linked human life to beings of the sky. Long before the Sumerians built temples or recorded myths, the land itself served as a teacher. Floods taught renewal. Drought taught caution. The stars taught patience. And the rivers taught flow, change, persistence. Everything the future Sumerians would come to believe about cosmic order already had a foundation in this silent, expansive landscape. As the climate stabilized and settlements grew denser, the stage quietly set, itself for something new. Human groups began clustering along higher ground, experimenting with trade routes, crafting tools with greater precision. The land was no longer just a place to survive. It was becoming a place to organize, to imagine, to plan. When the marsh winds eased at dusk and the last warmth drained from the sunlit plains, small clusters of early settlers gathered near hearths, their shadows flickering against reed walls. Across southern Mesopotamia, the world was changing in subtle, deliberate ways. Rivers shifted, soils thickened with fresh silt, and communities began to settle long enough for memory to matter. It is in this quiet transitional age, around 3800–3400 BCE, that the earliest marks in clay appeared. Small impressions made with a sharpened reed, pressed into tablets that dried slowly beside glowing embers. These marks were not words yet, but symbols of grain, livestock, movement, and obligation. They carry the faint scent of wet earth, smoke, and the human desire to hold on to something that might otherwise slip away. Long before writing emerged fully, clay served as the perfect medium for record keeping. Moist riverbank sediment, rich in mineral content, resisted cracking when shaped into tablets roughly 10 to 15 centimeters wide. Archaeologists have found these proto-tablets at Uruk, specifically in levels IV and the Third, their surfaces divided into neat rectangular compartments. Each mark indicated quantity or category, the earliest evidence of organized economies. Carved into these small surfaces, the beginnings of civilization revealed themselves through order rather than story. Yet the texture of the tablets, The ridged impressions of fingertips along their edges hints at something more intimate, a recognition that memory needed a vessel. Across the plains, when the first granaries expanded, administrators realized numbers alone could not capture the flow of goods. Tokens shaped like spheres, cones, and discs were used to represent amounts of barley, sheep, or labor. These tokens, stored inside sealed clay envelopes called bullae, were marked on the exterior with impressions matching the objects inside. Standing beside one of these envelopes now, you might notice the faint grooves left by fingernails, the subtle curvature of the clay where someone pressed it shut. This shift from physical tokens to symbolic impressions marks a turning point. The mind was beginning to move beyond the tangible, experimenting with abstraction. As populations grew, the pressure to record increased. Long before legends of the Anunnaki took written form, scribes in training practiced lines of repeating symbols, arranging them with slow, deliberate strokes. Reed styluses, cut at an angle to produce triangular wedge shapes, left crisp impressions only millimeters deep, yet consistent enough to standardize. The thickness of these tablets varied, some only 2 centimeters thick, others closer to 4. Depending on their purpose. Administrative documents were compact and easily stored, while ceremonial or boundary texts were more substantial. This attention to scale and durability reflects a culture slowly recognizing the weight of its own continuity. Imagine walking into an early tablet room, perhaps attached to a storehouse. The air would carry the earthy scent of drying clay, mixed with the faint musk of stored grain. Light seeped in through narrow openings, illuminating shelves lined with tablets arranged on woven mats. The soft scratch of styluses against clay punctuated the quiet. These sounds were rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat of record keeping. They reveal a society learning to coordinate labor, track resources, and maintain fairness among growing communities. There is a calm persistence in these early efforts, a belief that structure brings stability. Long before myths were carved into stone, the act of writing created a new kind of authority. A recorded transaction could outlast the breath that spoke it. A boundary marked with script could transcend the memory of its maker. Some scholars suggest this permanence shaped Sumerian ideas about cosmic order, influencing later stories of divine decrees and destinies inscribed by the gods. The connection between writing and power may have encouraged people to view the world as something governed by laws, both earthly and celestial. Perhaps this shift in thinking made them more receptive to the idea of beings who managed creation itself. Standing near the ancient workshop at Uruk, where thousands of tablets have been excavated, you can picture the daily rhythm of those early scribes. Their hands moved with patient repetition, forming symbols that would evolve into full cuneiform within a few centuries. Sunlight warmed the clay, hardening it slowly, while the soft hum of distant activity drifted into the room. In that quiet environment, knowledge began to accumulate, not through oral tradition alone, but through the deliberate act of preserving thought. The clay tablets, once fired accidentally in building fires or intentionally in kilns, survived millennia because of their density and mineral composition, typically measuring around 1.7 to 2.0 grams per cubic centimeter. Maybe the earliest writers understood the significance of what they were doing, or maybe they simply sought to keep track of daily necessities. Yet the transition from spoken memory to inscribed record is profound. It marks the moment humans began leaving messages for futures they would never meet. Each tablet is a bridge across time, a preserved intention. And as writing developed from pictographic marks to phonetic signs, the capacity to record myth, law, and cosmic order expanded dramatically. The world before civilization becomes visible through these first marks. It is a world discovering itself, shaping identity through organization and symbol. The clay tablets whisper of markets, harvests, and agreements, ordinary matters that laid the foundation for extraordinary stories. From these early impressions, a new kind of consciousness emerged, one capable of sustaining complex belief systems. When the earliest communities settled along the shifting banks of the Euphrates, long before the rise of Uruk or the shaping of Sumerian theology, the people of these marshlands already carried stories older than the clay beneath their feet. These myths lived in breath, gesture, and memory. They drifted across campfires, woven from observations of storms, floods, winds, and the slow turning of the night sky. Standing in this early world, you would feel the air thick with the scent of wet reeds and hear the distant rumble of seasonal thunder rolling across open plains. Long before the Anunnaki entered the written record, the land itself inspired beings who moved through shadow, water, and wind, shaping the earliest spiritual imagination. Across the marshlands, when night settled and the last orange light faded over the horizon, the sky stretched in a vast arc untouched by architecture. Stars shimmered with a clarity modern eyes rarely experience, their reflections trembling in shallow pools. Families gathered around fires not only for warmth, but for meaning, tracing patterns in the heavens that seemed to echo rhythms on earth. It's possible that these early watchers assigned stories to constellations long before cuneiform captured their significance. Perhaps a streaking meteor became a sign. Maybe the steady movement of Venus inspired reverence. Each celestial event carried weight, prompting explanations woven from emotion, necessity, and observation. These pre-Sumerian spiritual concepts likely emerged from direct encounters with nature. In a world where floods reshaped entire landscapes overnight, water spirits would feel inevitable. When sudden dust storms swept across the plains, obscuring the sun and coating everything in a fine, gritty veil, wind deities would come naturally. Archaeological traces from the Ubaid period, figurines with elongated bodies, finely shaped eyes, and textured clay surfaces suggest ritual importance tied to fertility, protection, or transformation. The texture of these objects, smooth in some places and rough in others, gives them a tactile presence that hints at careful intention rather than decorative impulse. Long before temples rose, sacred spaces were likely simple: reed enclosures, flattened earth circles, or platforms facing celestial landmarks. Excavations at early sites show clusters of clay cones driven into plastered walls, forming geometric mosaics that caught light during sunrise and sunset. These designs, measuring only a few centimeters each, required careful placement and repeated patterns. Their purpose remains debated. Some scholars argue for symbolic representation of order. Others suggest they served acoustic or visual functions during early rituals. The existence of these structures indicates a desire to shape physical environments into meaningful places, preparing the way for more formal worship later. When the first myths began to solidify, they did so around recurring natural forces. The earth cracked under summer heat, creating fissures that opened with soft groans. The rivers, swollen during spring melt, spread across plains with a slow, inevitable force. The marshes, shimmering with life, produced sounds that echoed through dusk, frogs calling in rhythmic patterns, insects humming above still water, reeds swaying in the faintest breeze. These sensory elements, experienced daily, shaped the earliest gods. Spirits of soil, guardians of watercourses, watchers of the wind, beings neither distant nor abstract, but tied directly to the cycles sustaining human life. In this early spiritual world, the underworld was not yet a realm of judgment, but a continuation of the land's deep layers. Burials uncovered in Ubaid settlements show bodies laid in shallow pits, sometimes accompanied by pottery, jars, or small personal items. The soil around these graves, rich with organic material, holds impressions of woven mats and decayed fibers. These details reveal a belief in continuity, a sense that life slipped into another form beneath the Earth's surface. Perhaps this idea later influenced Sumerian concepts of Kur, the shadowy land below. Maybe the earliest stories describe the descent of the spirit as a journey into the same soil that nourished crops and shaped homes. Looking upward, early sky watching shaped the foundations of divine hierarchy. When the moon rose, its light pooled softly across water, creating long streaks that shimmered with each ripple. Standing there, you might feel the cool air brushing your arms, carrying hints of distant rainfall. The predictability of lunar cycles offered stability in a world otherwise marked by environmental change. Some scholars believe this reliability formed the basis for associating celestial bodies with order, foresight, and guidance. The whisper of cosmic structure seeded itself into human imagination, preparing cultures to later accept gods who govern time, justice, and fate. As communities traveled along seasonal routes, carrying baskets woven from date palm fibers and tools made of polished stone, stories moved with them. A tale told near the marshes might appear again hundreds of kilometers away, reshaped by new landscapes but carrying familiar themes. Creation from water, spirits guiding the living, celestial beings watching from above. These migrating myths accumulated like sediment, layering over generations, becoming the bedrock upon which later Sumerian cosmology would rise. Evidence from comparative mythology suggests shared roots between early Mesopotamian, Anatolian, and Zagros beliefs. This blending of ideas created a fertile environment for more complex divine narratives. Maybe the earliest storytellers sensed something profound in the balance of their world. Life depended on harmony with forces far greater than themselves. Floods cleansed, yet destroyed. Winds cooled, yet stripped soil. The sun nurtured, yet scorched. From this tension, myths evolved to explain not only the present, but the uncertain future. These stories contained warnings, guidance, and reflections on how to live responsibly within shifting environments. They reveal a mindset already oriented toward meaning, already prepared to interpret existence through the lens of cosmic relationships. By the time Sumerian culture began to take form, these older, quieter gods had laid the groundwork. They offered the first vocabulary for understanding power, change, and continuity. Their presence lived in the land itself, a land that taught reverence through floodwaters and starlight. And from this foundation, newer, more defined beings would eventually emerge, carrying roles far more structured. Beings the Sumerians would name with precision, beings they would later call the Anunnaki. When the earliest cuneiform tablets begin to appear in the archaeological layers of early dynastic Mesopotamia, a subtle but extraordinary shift enters human consciousness. Among records of barley rations, livestock counts, and offering lists, a new category of beings emerges, figures described not merely as gods, but as powers tied to cosmic order, judgment, and origins. These beings are called the Anunnaki, a term that appears with enough consistency across enough sites to suggest they carry deep significance. Standing beside one of these tablets today, its surface cool beneath your fingertips, you can feel the weight of the idea embedded inside. The wedge-shaped strokes carry texture, intention, and a sense that something beyond ordinary life was being recorded with care. Long before the myths were fully assembled, the earliest references to the Anunnaki appear in administrative and ritual contexts. Tablets from Shuruppak, dating to around 2600 BCE, list offerings designated specifically for Anunna, gods associated with the underworld and heavenly order. In other sites, such as Nippur and Lagash, the term appears in contexts tied to temples, festivals, and royal legitimacy. These inscriptions are not poetic yet. They are functional, practical. Their purpose was to record what people believed necessary to maintain balance between human life and the unseen world. When the scribes inscribed these names, they did so with precision, carving angles only 2 to 3 millimeters deep, arranged in lines barely a centimeter apart. The craftsmanship reflects discipline and reverence. Across Mesopotamia, when archaeologists uncovered these tablets during 19th and early 20th century excavations, they found thousands of references in layers dating from 3000 to 2000 BCE. The consistency of the term suggests a collective understanding, but the interpretations differ. According to mainstream scholarship, the Anunnaki represented a broad assembly of deities linked to the earth and underworld, distinct from the celestial Igigi. Alternative perspectives propose that the distinction itself may reflect ancient memory of different classes of beings. Perhaps one group symbolized forces above, another those below. Maybe the Sumerians conceptualized cosmic hierarchy in terms inherited from older, pre-literate ancestors. Whatever the case, the tablets confirm that these beings held roles of judgment, decision-making, and destiny. Standing in the dim light of a museum, looking at a tablet recovered from Nippur, you might notice how the cuneiform wedges catch the light. Each impression casts a minuscule shadow, creating a textured surface that shifts depending on angle. The tablet's thickness, around 3 centimeters, suggests it was designed to be handled often. It records an offering schedule tied to astronomical cycles, likely linked to seasonal shifts observed by priest astronomers. The presence of the Anunnaki in this context implies they oversaw order beyond mere weather, something woven into the fabric of time. When the stars appeared in their predictable arcs across the Mesopotamian sky, the people saw the signature of divine organization. Some scholars argue that the Anunnaki's earliest appearances reflect agricultural anxieties. Floods, droughts, and shifting river channels shaped existence, and divine assemblies represented stability amid uncertainty. Others propose that the myths later expanded these roles, transforming the Anunnaki from natural spirits into cosmic administrators. Evidence from the Eridu Genesis tablet suggests a council of gods determining the fate of humanity before the Great Flood. The language used, formal, structured, reads like an ancient constitution. Yet the imagery remains vivid. Beings convening to evaluate whether creation had strayed from balance. Maybe the Sumerians saw these councils as mirrors of their own city assemblies. Or maybe they hinted at a deeper memory, something inherited from older myths carried across generations. When the Atrahasis narrative surfaces in later Akkadian texts, the Anunnaki are described participating in decisions that reshape the human world. Their actions alternate between benevolence and judgment, suggesting complexity rather than flat symbolism. The presence of such consistent themes invites questions. Why did early civilizations imagine councils rather than singular gods? Why assign them roles of governance rather than arbitrary power? This organization hints at a model, perhaps inspired by natural cycles or early political structures. But it also reflects a worldview in which human behavior and cosmic forces intertwine. Touching the replica of a tablet from Tel Harmal, you might feel the faint grain of baked clay, the surface slightly warm from ambient air. The symbols describe ritual offerings during lunar phases. Priest astronomers likely climbed temple platforms to observe the moon's path, noting its angles, brightness, and periodic eclipses. These observations shaped ritual calendars and mythological interpretations. As the moon waxed and waned, its cycles may have reinforced the idea of a governing assembly responsible for order. Scholars debate whether these celestial patterns inspired the concept of divine councils or simply mirrored them. Either way, the sky served as a silent witness, reinforcing beliefs carved into clay. Maybe the first storytellers sensed in the heavens a deliberate rhythm, the regularity of constellations, the slow drift of Venus across the horizon, the sudden appearance of comets. All these events carried weight. The Anunnaki became the interpreters of these patterns, guardians of cycles that shaped harvests, floods, and fates. Yet uncertainty persists. Were the Sumerians describing symbolic forces, or encoding memories of older myths inherited from cultures long vanished? The evidence hints at both possibilities. Through archaeological layers, the Anunnaki emerge not suddenly, but gradually, like figures stepping out of mist, first as names, then as roles, then as personalities woven into stories of creation, judgment, and cosmic balance. Their presence becomes a thread running through centuries of tablets, connecting Eridu, Nippur, and Ur. Every discovery deepens the mystery, but each detail also offers a clearer picture of how the earliest written memories carried beings who shaped the worldview of an entire civilization. What begins as administrative notation soon expands into mythic architecture, preparing the way for a more structured understanding of divine hierarchy. And from these early inscriptions, the pathways open toward a world filled with temples, rituals, and stories that would define Sumerian identity. A world ready for deeper exploration in the next stage of emergence. When the morning light first touched the plains of southern Mesopotamia around 4500–3800 BCE, two settlements began to rise with a quiet determination. One was Eridu, often called the earliest city, its layers stacked like geological memory. The other was Uruk, a sprawling center whose growth would transform human history. Walking across these ancient sites today, you'd feel the soft crumble of sun-baked brick beneath your feet, smell dust warmed by centuries of heat, and see foundations that hint at walls once soaring several meters high. Here, long before writing matured, the beliefs and structures that later supported the Anunnaki myths took shape. These cities hold the archaeological heartbeat of Sumer, a rhythm made of clay, water, and vision. Across Eridu, when archaeologists first excavated its deep layers, they found more than 18 superimposed temples dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. Each temple layer measured roughly 12 to 20 meters across, built in phases over more than 1,000 years. The floors were plastered smooth with gypsum, creating a cool surface even in harsh heat. When you imagine stepping onto one of those floors, the temperature difference is immediate, the air subtly cooler near the ground, the faint smell of minerals rising from plaster that once reflected firelight during rituals. Scholars agree this site reveals the roots of organized religion. Others notice the precision of its structure and wonder whether earlier myths, now lost, influenced its architectural evolution. Meanwhile, Uruk expanded at a pace unseen anywhere else at the time. By 3500 BCE, its footprint spread more than 250 hectares, housing tens of thousands of people. Excavated walls show bricks stamped with signs of ownership or temple affiliation. The Iana precinct, dedicated to Inanna, featured monumental buildings constructed from thousands of molded bricks, measuring roughly 10, 20, 7 centimeters each. Their baked surfaces retain a subtle grain pattern, evidence of reed impressions left during drying. The complex included courtyards, storerooms, and ceremonial halls, arranged with deliberate geometry. Standing there, you can almost hear the muffled sound of footsteps against packed earth. Feel the warmth radiating off brick surfaces at dusk, and sense the scale of organization it took to maintain such a city. In 1946, under the relentless summer sun, archaeologist Fuad Safar led a team through the dusty mounds south of modern-day Nasiriyah. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the metallic scent of tools striking compacted soil. Layers of sand shifted with each brushstroke as they approached what appeared to be an early Ubaid structure. As Safar cleared a section near a collapsed wall, he uncovered a plastered platform with traces of red pigment. His assistant uncovered a second platform beneath it, slightly smaller but oriented in the same direction. Hours passed as they removed debris, revealing not one but multiple temple foundations stacked directly on top of one another. The team recorded measurements, each platform's height around 40-50 centimeters, their alignments consistent with earlier structures. Fine gypsum dust clung to their skin as they worked, and a faint smell of ancient minerals rose from the exposed surfaces. Safar realized they weren't looking at a single building. They were uncovering centuries of ritual continuity. By the end of the season, 14 temple layers were documented, each representing a different era. Safar concluded Eridu wasn't merely a settlement, it was a spiritual anchor. This discovery changed archaeological understanding forever, revealing a city whose religious identity shaped Sumerian ideology in ways still debated today. Across these sites, the earliest myths gain archaeological footing. The Anunnaki, first appearing in later tablets, were not yet named during the Ubaid and Uruk periods, but the groundwork for their roles was already forming. Ritual precincts, raised platforms, and ziggurat prototypes indicate societies that saw the divine as structured, elevated, and central. When temple terraces rose, above the plains, reaching heights of 10 to 15 meters, they symbolized connection between ground and sky. The people climbing these terraces would have felt wind brushing their faces, carrying coolness from the river, reminding them of forces greater than themselves. Scholars interpret these early temples as administrative centers, ritual spaces, or astronomical reference points. Some researchers highlight the orientation of major Uruk structures toward celestial events. Others argue the alignments reflect practical considerations, such as river pathways or prevailing wind directions. Maybe both are true. Utility on one level, symbolism on another. The debate continues, shaped by fragmentary evidence and the philosophical challenge of understanding a worldview so rooted in both earth and sky. When Uruk's population grew, its administrative needs expanded. Clay tablets from the late Uruk period show standardized symbols, carefully incised into surfaces measuring around 6 to 10 centimeters wide. The script's evolution suggests a culture increasingly concerned with record-keeping, legitimacy, and divine sanction. Rulers claimed authority through proximity to gods, and later myths positioned the Anunnaki as those who granted or withdrew kingship. Although these stories appear centuries after Uruk's rise, their conceptual roots, councils of power, divine oversight, likely trace back to this early social organization. Walking across the ruins now, the sensory world becomes a guide. The gritty feel of ancient brick, the muted echo of footsteps inside a partially restored hall, the steady hum of desert wind sweeping across open space. All these sensations suggest a place where people encountered the divine through architecture itself. The structures were not merely functional. They framed sky, shadow, and sound in ways that shaped belief. When the moon rose above a temple's stepped outline, its reflection cast onto water channels below, the effect must have felt deliberate, not staged, but meaningful. Maybe early priests interpreted these atmospheric effects as messages. Maybe the movements of shadows served as reminders of cycles or as metaphors for cosmic order. Alternately, the architecture may simply reflect an intuitive sense of balance. Yet the persistence of these forms, across centuries, across cities, hints at shared ideas passed quietly from generation to generation. Ideas that eventually solidified into myth. Ideas that carried the first whispers of the Anunnaki into human memory. What begins at Eridu and Uruki is the coherence of belief, the merging of environment, architecture, and narrative into a worldview that sees life woven into larger forces. And from this emerging clarity, the stories grow stronger, preparing to take fuller shape in the next chapter of Sumerian history. When the first full mythological tablets begin appearing in the archaeological layers of early dynastic and Old Babylonian Mesopotamia, something remarkable becomes visible. The Sumerians are no longer simply recording offerings or administrative lists. They are shaping narratives that explain who humans are, why the world functions as it does, and what forces stand above mortal life. The clay now carries stories of beginnings, councils, judgments, and cosmic structure. When you hold a replica of one of these tablets, its surface firm beneath your thumb, you feel the slight ridges of each wedge, the faint grain of baked clay, and the sense that every line was pressed with intention. These are not casual stories. They are statements about existence. Across sites such as Nippur, Sippar, and ancient Shuruppak, tablets describe scenes in which the Anunnaki act as architects and overseers. The language is formal, using verbs of decree, creation, and decision. In one early text, the gods gather in an assembly, their presence indicated by lists of names arranged in careful order. Scholars note that the term Anunna often refers to a specific group, powerful, judgment-oriented figures associated with both heaven and earth. Meanwhile, another group, the Igigi, appear in contexts tied to labor or rebellion. This distinction, visible in grammar and positioning on tablets, suggests an internal hierarchy within the divine realm. Maybe this reflects political structures of the cities themselves. Maybe it echoes older memories carried through oral tradition. Either possibility offers a lens into Sumerian thought. In the Atrahasis narrative, dating to the Old Babylonian period, yet drawing from earlier Sumerian traditions, the Anunnaki appear in discussions about the labor burdens placed upon lesser gods. The text describes tension, decisions, the idea that creation emerges from negotiation rather than chaos. When the Igigi rebel, unwilling to maintain irrigation canals and agricultural systems symbolized through myth, the Anunnaki convene to determine a solution. Their decision, to fashion humans, is presented with formal structure. Measurements appear in the tablet describing quantities of clay, divine essence, and ritual locations. These measurements, while symbolic, provide tangible details. A sacred pit 3 meters wide, an effigy mold approximately 60 centimeters long, a mixing bowl carved from dense stone. This framing grounds myth in materiality. Standing before a display of the Eridu Genesis tablet fragments, you see the faint curvature of broken edges, the mottled coloration from millennia buried in soil. The text recounts a council of gods deciding whether humanity has grown too noisy, too disruptive. The flood appears not as punishment alone, but as rebalancing. The phrasing uses verbs associated with setting right, restoring silence, and reordering foundations. When the Sumerians wrote these lines, they were not describing random destruction. They were explaining cycles, how imbalance leads to correction, how creation must be maintained. This worldview resonates through later traditions, showing the influence of these early stories. The presence of the Anunnaki in these narratives raises interpretive questions. Were they metaphors for natural cycles? Some scholars argue they represent forces like wind, fertility, groundwater, and destiny. Others believe they symbolize ancestral memory, the collective authority of earlier generations mythologized. And then there are voices outside mainstream scholarship, who propose that these beings could reflect older, deeper, mythic memories of contact with sky-oriented figures. The tablets do not give definitive answers. They preserve complexity without forcing resolution, allowing layers of meaning to coexist. Imagine sitting beside a scribe as he copies a flood tablet around 1800 BCE. The stylus rests lightly in his hand, made from reed stalks harvested along canal edges. The workspace smells of clay, smoke from an oil lamp, and the faint aroma of wool garments drying nearby. As he presses each mark, the soft scraping sound repeats in steady rhythm. His lines measure only millimeters in height, yet he shapes vast cosmic scenes through these small impressions. It is this contrast, tiny marks carrying enormous ideas, that gives Sumerian mythology its enduring power. The emphasis on councils and decision-making also reveals something profound. The Sumerians imagined a universe not ruled by one absolute figure, but managed through assemblies. Each deity held responsibilities, domains, and roles. This distributed structure mirrors early city politics, where elders, priests, and administrators met to settle disputes. Maybe the divine world simply reflected the human world, but it is equally possible that humans mirrored the structures they believed existed above them. The direction of influence remains debated. The tablets also preserve unanswered questions. Why do some lists include 7 Anunnaki, while others reference 50? Why do descriptions shift between generational roles and cosmic functions? Why are some gods associated with subterranean waters, while others govern celestial paths? These inconsistencies do not weaken the mythology. They enrich it. They show that Sumerian belief was not rigid, but evolving, adapting as cities rose and fell, as rituals changed, and as new interpretations emerged. Touching the surface of a transliterated text, you see that the stories move between practical realities and cosmic narrative. Irrigation canals become symbols of divine labor. Seasonal floods become reminders of cosmic judgment. Human breath becomes the result of divine intention shaped through clay and spirit. Maybe the myths served as reassurance. Maybe they acted as instruction. Or maybe they were designed to remind future generations that existence itself requires balance, awareness, and humility. What these tablets reveal is not merely mythology. They show a civilization recognizing its place in a larger structure, perceiving itself as part of cycles that extend far beyond a single lifetime. And through their stories of creation and oversight, they prepare the foundation for the next stage, a world where these myths become lived experience, shaping daily life, architecture, and ritual in ways that endure for centuries. When the cities of Sumer reached their height around 2600, 2400 BCE, the world felt ordered, rhythmic, and filled with meaning. Walking through the broad streets of Ur, Lagash, or Nippur at dawn, you would hear the muted thud of wooden doors opening, smell the warm scent of barley bread baking in clay ovens, and feel the soft vibration of footsteps echoing across packed earth courtyards. The air carried the faint mineral scent of drying mud brick, mixed with the sharper aroma of bitumen used to seal canal walls. Above all of this, the ziggurats rose like mountains carved by human hands, their terraces catching the first glimmers of sunlight. To the people living here, these structures were not monuments alone. They were bridges between earth and sky, places where the presence of the Anunnaki felt near. In these cities, daily life unfolded with steady purpose. Farmers guided water through narrow irrigation channels, each channel reinforced with baked bricks measuring roughly 30 x 30 x 7 centimeters. The sound of flowing water created a subdued music that accompanied their work, a reminder that the land's fertility depended on careful balance. Traders moved through bustling markets carrying baskets woven from date palm fibers, their surfaces rough yet flexible. The market smelled of dried fish, freshly ground grain, and aromatic resins imported from distant lands. Overhead, the sky shifted from pale morning blue to a deeper hue as the sun climbed, offering a backdrop that felt constant across generations. Imagine stepping inside a scribal school, its small courtyard shaded by reed mats stretched across wooden beams. Young trainees sit cross-legged on the ground, clay tablets resting on their knees. They hold styluses cut from river reeds, the tips angled to produce the wedge-shaped impressions of cuneiform. The scratching sound fills the air in a soft, rhythmic pattern. A senior scribe, wearing a garment woven from wool dyed in muted brown, walks slowly along the row, checking the spacing of signs. Each student learns the myths, hymns, and administrative lists that preserve collective memory. When you stand here, you can sense the seriousness of this task. Writing is not only skill, it is stewardship. Temple life formed the core of the city's identity. Ritual workers swept courtyards each morning, their brooms made from bundled reeds tied with hemp fiber. Inside, the floors of major temples were coated with gypsum plaster, cool to the touch and lightly reflective. Priests arranged offerings of dates, fish, and barley beer on stone tables. These tables, carved from dense limestone, measured around 1 meter in length and stood knee-high. Flames from oil lamps flickered gently along the walls, casting shifting shadows that made carved reliefs appear to breathe. The atmosphere felt hushed, deliberate, and suffused with the belief that the Anunnaki observed these acts, maintaining harmony through human devotion. Astronomy shaped much of the rhythm of ritual. At night, when the air cooled and the wind softened, priest astronomers climbed temple terraces to observe the sky. They noted the rising of Venus, the position of the moon, and the movement of constellations across the horizon. The stars shimmered with clarity above the flat plains, their positions used to mark agricultural cycles, festival dates, and omens. Clay tablets record observations with surprising accuracy, describing lunar phases and predicting eclipses with methods that still intrigue scholars. Imagine standing at the top of a ziggurat platform, the stone beneath your feet cool from night air, watching the arc of the heavens sweep silently. Overhead, it feels as though the city breathes in rhythm with the cosmos. Domestic life carried its own quiet beauty. Homes were built from mud brick mixed with straw, their walls smooth after repeated replastering. Walking inside one, you'd notice the faint earthy smell and the gentle coolness the thick walls provided. A family might gather around a central hearth, where pots made from buff-colored clay rested on low stands. The sound of grinding grain drifted from the corner as a woman used a stone quern, its surface worn smooth from years of use. Children played with small clay figurines or rolled marbles made from polished stones. Life felt both simple and intricate, structured by the movements of the sun, the cycles of water, and the obligations of community. There was also a quiet awareness that the city existed within a larger cosmic framework. People believed the Anunnaki watched over their actions, ensuring justice, stability, and order. Courtrooms recorded decisions on clay tablets, citing divine authority for fair rulings. Oaths were taken in the names of gods who governed truth and destiny. This belief system supported social cohesion. It also framed daily responsibilities as part of a broader ethical system. When someone tended a canal or prepared offerings, they were participating in the maintenance of cosmic balance. Philosophically, the Sumerians saw themselves woven into a continuum rather than isolated individuals. Their achievements, irrigation systems, temple complexes, administrative structures, expressed a worldview rooted in patience and foresight. Their architecture framed shadows and sunlight in ways that shaped ritual meaning. Their stories taught that existence required both practical skill and spiritual awareness. Maybe this is why their civilization endured through cycles of change. The harmony they sought in daily life mirrored the harmony they believed governed the stars. Imagine walking through the city at dusk, the sky turning deep violet as oil lamps flicker along narrow lanes. The smell of warm baked brick lingers in the air. You hear distant chanting from a temple, carried softly by wind sweeping across the rooftops. Above you, the first stars appear, bright against the darkening sky. For the Sumerians, this sight was not merely beautiful. It was a reminder that the heavens remained anchored to the same cycles that shaped their days. And within this golden age, something deeper waited quietly, a sense that the myths held layers still hidden, waiting to be understood. When night settled over the great cities of Sumer, long after the last market stalls closed and the final embers faded inside family hearths, a different kind of activity began atop the temple terraces. The air cooled, carrying the faint scent of river moisture and baked clay. Shadows stretched across ziggurat stairways, and the sky unveiled itself in full splendor. Stars scattered like fine grains of silver dust, constellations sharp against the dark. It was in these quiet hours that the priest astronomers stepped forward, their role essential to the civilization's understanding of order. Standing at these heights, you would feel the wind moving gently against your skin, hear the low rustle of reed fields beyond the city walls, and sense a connection between earth and sky that shaped every ritual below. Across Mesopotamia, astronomy wasn't a separate science. It was woven into identity, agriculture, politics, and myth. The priest astronomers observed the heavens with instruments crafted from everyday materials. measuring cords, wooden sighting rods, carefully positioned markers on temple floors. Their accuracy still impresses scholars. Clay tablets describe lunar cycles with deviations of only minutes, and observations of Venus recorded in the Amisadaka series remain among the oldest continuous astronomical datasets. Imagine them adjusting clay markers, pressing grids into the soil of rooftop terraces, the cool surface of the clay firm beneath their palms. Each movement was deliberate. Each observation carried significance. On cloudless nights, the sky offered a panoramic view of the celestial mechanics the Sumerians believed reflected divine intention. Constellations such as the Bull of Heaven glowed above them, guiding predictions of seasonal floods. The priests knew when the moon dipped below the horizon at a particular angle, a new agricultural phase approached. They noted the brightness of Jupiter, the retrograde motion of Mars, the shimmering rise of Sirius at dawn. These details structured time itself. The heavens were a vast calendar, a silent text that required interpretation. Maybe this is why the Anunnaki myths emphasized order, decision-making, and cosmic balance. The sky communicated these themes every night. In the city of Ur, around 2150 BCE, a young priest astronomer named Naram Eli climbed the steps of the ziggurat just after dusk. The air tasted faintly of salt from nearby marshes, and a warm breeze carried the smell of bitumen from sealing pits below. He carried a clay tablet, still soft enough to mark, and a wooden rod used for measuring angles against the horizon. Reaching the upper platform, Naram Eli positioned himself near a cornerstone smoothed from centuries of use. He waited for the appearance of a specific star, a bright point near the constellation traditionally linked to Inanna. Yet when the star rose, it seemed slightly displaced, shimmering in a position that conflicted with previous observations. Naram Eli adjusted his rod, checking alignment with etched grooves in the terrace floor. The discrepancy measured nearly half a finger width, roughly 8 millimeters when projected along the sightline. He repeated the measurement. The result remained the same. Recording it onto his tablet, he felt a mixture of curiosity and quiet tension. Had atmospheric dust altered the star's appearance? Was this an omen? Or was the sky itself teaching a new pattern? He marked the position with deliberate strokes, the stylus clicking softly in the night air. By morning, the senior priests reviewed his tablet. The shift, they concluded, corresponded with a rare atmospheric event tied to seasonal storms in the west. The record was added to temple archives. Naram Eli's careful observation expanded their understanding. It also reinforced a belief. The heavens were alive with meaning, and their messages required patience and precision to interpret. These stories form part of the intellectual heartbeat of Sumer. Priest astronomers weren't searching for omens alone. They were mapping cycles that helped predict floods, frame ritual calendars, and explain cosmological principles. The inscriptions they left behind reveal a discipline rooted in observation. Temperature changes affected visibility. Wind direction altered atmospheric clarity. Even the thickness of clay tablets mattered, since thicker tablets held more stable impressions for long-term reference. Their work required sensitivity to physical details. The cold feel of carved stone underfoot, the faint warmth of clay baked by daytime sun, the shifting brightness of stars at different times of year. Imagine standing beside one of these observers. The night stretches quietly. A full moon glows above the river's slow currents. You hear the subtle sound of charcoal sparking in an oil lamp, smell its faint resinous smoke, and feel the steady rhythm of breath as the priest lines up his measuring rod. In this moment, the practice becomes meditation, a merging of concentration, reverence, and scientific curiosity. This fusion, perhaps more than anything, defines Sumerian intellectual life. The knowledge gained from these nightly observations flowed into mythic structure. The Anunnaki became associated with specific forces that mirrored celestial order. Their counsels echoed the alignment of stars. Their decisions reflected cycles of drought and plenty. The Sumerians saw no separation between sky and story. Each reinforced the other. Maybe this is why their myths feel so layered, blending empirical awareness with spiritual insight. They were capturing the world as a seamless whole. Through the work of these priest astronomers, civilization found rhythm. The stars guided planting seasons. Lunar phases shaped festival timings. Planetary cycles influenced rituals of kingship. Even architecture followed celestial patterns, with temple orientations aligned toward solstices or heliacal risings. This level of design required extraordinary commitment, a belief that aligning human spaces with cosmic geometry anchored society within universal order. Yet beneath this golden age, quiet hints of complexity lingered. Observations sometimes contradicted expectations. Cycles shifted subtly. Stories expanded to accommodate anomalies. The Sumerians didn't ignore these details. They wove them into their worldview, allowing mystery and meaning to coexist. And from this interplay between certainty and curiosity, their most enduring myths continued to evolve, holding secrets that still invite exploration. When you approach a Sumerian temple complex at its golden height, you notice something immediately. Nothing is placed casually. Every terrace, corridor, doorway, and courtyard aligns with intention. The bricks, warm beneath your fingertips, hold the faint smell of sun-dried clay mixed with bitumen. The ziggurat above rises in stepped layers, its surfaces catching shifting bands of light as the sun moves across the sky. In these structures, the Sumerians saw more than architecture. They saw a way to interpret time, preserve memory, and communicate with forces they believed stood beyond the horizon of ordinary experience. Standing here, you feel wind brush past your face, carrying echoes of ritual chants and the distant murmur of irrigation canals. Inside the temple courts, ritual workers moved with practiced grace. They swept gypsum floors smooth before dawn, their brooms made from bundled reeds whispering softly across the surface. The plaster, polished and cool, reflected lampfire in muted, wavering shapes. Priests arranged offerings on limestone tables worn slightly concave from centuries of use. The smell of barley beer mingled with incense made from imported resins, both scents rising gently toward ceilings supported by thick wooden beams. When the light shifted through narrow openings, shadows traced patterns on plastered walls, creating fleeting designs that felt almost intentional. Maybe these shifting shapes helped reinforce the belief that divine presence flowed through the structure. Imagine stepping into a narrow chamber designed for sound. The walls, 40 centimeters thick and made from dense fired brick, absorb low frequencies while amplifying mid-range tones. A chant spoken softly near the wall returns with subtle resonance. The priest leading a ritual might pause, listening as his voice blends with the chamber's acoustic character. Some archaeologists suggest these spaces served practical ritual needs. Others propose symbolic functions, echoes representing divine response, or sound resonances marking sacred transitions. Both interpretations hold weight. The architecture itself hints at layered meaning, shaped by centuries of experimentation and cultural memory. During certain nights, when the moon appeared at specific angles along the horizon, priest astronomers climbed the ziggurat steps to observe alignments projected through architectural frames. These frames were not windows, but intentional gaps between structures, often only 20 to 30 centimeters wide, positioned to mark solstices, equinoxes, or planetary risings. The cool night air settled around them as they pressed measuring rods against carved floor lines. A faint smell of oil from temple lamps drifted upward. Above them, the stars gleamed with startling clarity. Their observations were not isolated notes. They shaped festivals, agricultural cycles, and mythic narratives. The temple served as a living instrument for reading the sky. Around 2050 BCE, in the city of Nippur, a senior priest named Enlil-etu prepared for a rare astronomical event predicted months earlier. He climbed the eastern terrace carrying a clay tablet, its surface still damp enough for new impressions. The air was cool, touched by the scent of river water drifting from the north. Reaching the viewing platform, Enlil-etu positioned himself beside a carved sighting groove etched into the brick floor. Tonight, the moon, Jupiter, and a small seasonal star were expected to align within a narrow arc. As the sky darkened, he watched the moon rise, its soft white glow illuminating the ziggurat's edge. Minutes later, Jupiter emerged, bright and steady. A thin cloud drifted across the horizon, sending a faint chill through the air, but he held his position. When the small star appeared precisely where calculations predicted, Enlil-etu pressed his stylus into the waiting tablet, noting angle, brightness, and time. His breath mixed with the cool wind as he worked, the clay responding smoothly beneath his steady hand. By dawn, the record joined the temple archives. The alignment confirmed seasonal transitions and reinforced long-held ritual timing. Enlil-etu's observation became part of a chain of memory, one more fragment in the temple's ongoing dialogue with the sky. These temples functioned as more than religious centers. They were repositories of knowledge. Rooms held tablets arranged on wooden shelves, each tablet measuring between 12 and 20 centimeters across, inscribed with inventories, rituals, astronomical data, or mythological hymns. The air inside these archives felt notably cooler due to thick walls and limited ventilation. Touching a tablet, you would feel the faint texture of reed impressions along the edges, evidence of how they were held and shaped. These texts preserve generations of accumulated insight. Their survival into the modern era feels almost miraculous. Imagine standing in a courtyard during a festival. Musicians play lyres made of wood and gut strings, their notes drifting upward along the terraced walls. Dancers move slowly across packed earth, following patterns older than written language. Smoke from incense rises in thin, wavering lines, carrying scent toward the open sky. Each movement reinforces a worldview, human action harmonizing with cosmic cycles. The temple becomes a stage where myth and observation intersect, where daily life and divine story knit together. Yet beneath this grandeur lies something quieter. The sense that the temple was also a message, not just for the gods, but for future generations. The alignments, the archives, the acoustics, the rituals, all preserved forms of memory. Maybe the Sumerians understood that civilizations rise and fall, but knowledge, if structured carefully, can endure. The temple, in this sense, becomes both monument and reminder. pointing toward mysteries still waiting beneath the surface of myth and history. When Sumer reached the fullness of its golden age, the myths that shaped daily life crystallized into a world view, both structured and expansive. The Anunnaki were no longer distant names on temple walls. They had become the architects of justice, the keepers of cosmic rhythm, the watchers whose decisions echoed through every harvest, every festival, every quiet moment beneath the stars. Standing inside a temple courtyard at dusk, you would feel the heat of the day still radiating from the brick, smell incense drifting in thin currents, and hear the steady chant of priests reciting hymns that trace the origins of creation. These stories weren't abstractions, they were lived truths. Across the tablets of Nippur, Sipar, and Ur, the Anunnaki appear not as capricious figures, but as beings tied to order. Their councils determined the legitimacy of kings, the timing of rituals, and the balance between human activity and the forces of nature. In the Enlil and Ninlil cycle, they preside over consequences with solemn precision. In the Eridu Genesis, they deliberate before releasing the flood that reshaped humanity's future. These episodes are inscribed with signs barely 5 millimeters tall, arranged in lines no wider than a thumb. Yet within these small impressions lies a universe of law and intention. The clay carries weight, not only physical but conceptual. Imagine standing near a priest as he prepares a recitation during a festival. The air glows with lamp fire, casting warm hues along polished plaster walls. He holds a tablet lightly, feeling the grain of its surface beneath his fingers. As he reads, his voice blends with the mild resonance of the temple chamber, making each phrase feel anchored. He speaks of the Anunnaki convening beneath starlight, determining destinies with measured thought. To the listeners gathered in the courtyard, these stories are anchors. They explain why certain rituals must be performed, why justice must remain balanced, why kings rule only by divine approval. The mythic and civic systems reinforce each other like interlocking bricks. This elevation of the Anunnaki coincides with rising administrative complexity. When scribes recorded legal judgments, they often invoked deities as witnesses. When rulers issued decrees, they framed their authority as established by the assembly of the gods. Such phrasing does more than legitimize power. It mirrors the celestial order observed by astronomers. Just as stars followed precise cycles overhead, human society followed cycles reinforced by myth. Maybe this parallel wasn't intentional. Maybe it simply emerged from living beneath a sky that repeated itself with unwavering reliability. Yet the effect shaped civilization in enduring ways. Walking through the ruins today, you can imagine the sensory landscape that sustained these beliefs. The faint grit of wind-blown sand underfoot, the earthy smell of clay jars filled with stored grain, the distant sound of workers tending canals. Above it all, the horizon opens wide, the sky a slow-moving tapestry that the Sumerians saw as a reflective layer of their own world. If the heavens maintained order, the gods who govern those heavens must embody that order. This logic saturates the myths, giving them coherence across centuries. But these stories also reveal questions that linger even now. Why did the Sumerians give the Anunnaki roles tied so closely to governance rather than elemental control? Why position them as judges over fate rather than creators of thunder or fire? Scholars suggest these roles mirror early city assemblies, where groups of elders decided matters through careful debate. Others argue that the myths encode a recognition of complexity in natural cycles, the need for balance, negotiation, and adaptation. The presence of a divine council may reflect ancient understandings of interdependence. Life required cooperation, not dominance. And perhaps the myths simply expressed that truth. Imagine, for a moment, the scene the myths describe. The Anunnaki seated in a vast hall, discussing the fate of humanity after observing its behavior. Not as tyrants, but as caretakers, evaluating balance. The halls in which these stories were recited had acoustic properties that enhanced this imagery. A soft chant could fill a room with surprising depth, mimicking the presence of multiple voices. Maybe listeners felt surrounded by the divine assembly. Maybe the stories weren't just told, but experienced physically through sound, shadow, and atmosphere. As myths evolved, the Anunnaki became central to humanity's understanding of responsibility. Humans were shaped to maintain the world, the stories said. Humans were expected to respect boundaries and cycles. When they forgot, the consequences were not arbitrary. They unfolded like natural reactions. In this sense, myth becomes instruction, a way to guide society gently through narrative rather than decree. Clay tablets containing these stories reinforce this purpose. Their survival through fires, floods, and centuries of burial suggests the Sumerians succeeded in preserving what mattered most. Yet even at this height of myth, a sense of something hidden lingers. The stories shift between poetic, symbolic, and literal interpretations. They leave room for curiosity, for wondering about origins, for noticing connections between human experience and cosmic order. And beneath these layers lies a quiet suggestion that the myths contain not just reflections of the world, but messages meant to endure, shaped by hands that understood how fragile memory can be. When you stand before a Sumerian temple at dawn, long before the sun crests the horizon, you notice a stillness beneath the surface of the city. The air holds a muted coolness, carrying faint traces of clay dust and river moisture. These structures, built from millions of hand-shaped bricks, seem ordinary at first glance. Yet as light begins to move across their edges, something subtle reveals itself. The angles, the corridors, the terraces, they behave like instruments tuned to the rhythms of the sky. Some alignments were obvious to ancient observers, marking solstices or lunar risings. Others remain hidden, waiting for modern tools to illuminate them. Perhaps the Sumerians intended these alignments as messages, or perhaps they emerged naturally from a worldview that understood architecture and astronomy as inseparable. Across the ziggurats of Ur, Eridu, and Sipar, archaeologists have measured deviations no greater than a single degree from celestial axes. The main stairway at Ur faces 210 degrees southwest, aligning with the winter solstice sunset as it would have appeared around 2100 BCE. In the quiet moments before dusk, the sun projects a narrow band of warm light along the temple's central corridor, illuminating a stone slab only 45 centimeters wide. Some scholars interpret this as a ceremonial feature. Others argue it served as a simple architectural rhythm. Yet the consistency across multiple sites invites deeper questions. What if these alignments reflect a hidden layer of symbolic meaning? What if they were intentional markers linking human activity to the sky's unhurried cycles? Inside smaller chambers, the quiet deepens. Thick brick walls dull outside noise, creating environments of near silence where even a whisper feels amplified. The temperature holds steady around 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, regardless of the season, due to the density of the materials. In these spaces, light behaves unpredictably. When a lamp is placed near the doorway, shadows stretch across the room in elongated shapes, occasionally aligning with shallow grooves carved into the floor. Some researchers believe these grooves record measurement lines for observing planetary movement. Others think they served mundane ritual purposes. The evidence remains incomplete. But the interplay of shadow, sound, and orientation suggests intentionality. Perhaps these rooms functioned as both sanctuaries and observatories, hidden laboratories of the ancient world. Beneath certain temple courtyards, subsurface surveys have revealed narrow tunnels, some only 60 centimeters in height, arranged in geometric grids. These tunnels do not lead to burial chambers or storage pits. Instead, they appear to trace patterns beneath the visible structure, mirroring alignments found above ground. When ground-penetrating radar scanned the ziggurat at Ur, it detected a sequence of voids forming a repeating pattern resembling a stepped triangle, oriented toward the rising of Venus. Why embed this shape beneath the earth? Scholars debate its function, offering interpretations rooted in ritual, engineering, and astronomy. What if the Sumerians saw the unseen world beneath their cities as equally meaningful as the visible one? Maybe the substructure represented a hidden mirror of the celestial order above. The art of Sumer hints at similar dualities. Cylinder seals often show deities seated before star symbols, arranged in clusters that correspond to known constellations. In one seal from Lagash, the Anunnaki appear alongside 7-pointed stars, with each figure positioned according to relative brightness. The details are precise. The spacing matches the apparent positions of Pleiades around 2300 BCE. Whether intentional or coincidental, the resemblance is striking. A conservative interpretation suggests symbolic representation of divinity. A broader view opens the possibility that the Sumerians encoded astronomical knowledge in their artwork, using symbols as bridges between sacred story and observed sky. Walking through a reconstructed temple today, you notice how the materials respond to light. Fired brick absorbs warmth gradually, releasing it slowly as evening approaches. Polished gypsum floors reflect lamp fire in muted glimmers, adding faint luminosity to interior spaces. These sensory qualities may have supported rituals meant to evoke cosmic imagery. Imagine a priest stepping into a chamber where shadows mimic the arc of the moon's path, or where sound echoes in patterns resembling rhythmic breaths. In such moments, hidden dimensions of architecture become part of the ritual experience. Perhaps these effects were not accidental. Perhaps they embodied a sophisticated understanding of how environment shapes perception. Modern science continues to uncover layers of this hidden world. Astronomers overlay ancient sky models onto architectural plans. Geologists analyze soil composition beneath ziggurats to track construction phases. Acoustic engineers test resonance patterns inside sealed chambers. Each discipline adds a piece to the puzzle, revealing structures that served multiple functions at once: administrative, spiritual, astronomical, and symbolic. And yet, with each discovery, more questions emerge. What knowledge did the builders possess that we no longer understand? What meanings were preserved through alignment, silence, and shadow? In the end, the hidden dimensions of Sumerian architecture do not form a single cohesive message. They form a landscape of possibilities, some grounded in evidence, others shaped by imagination. Scholars interpret, measure, and debate. Yet beneath every explanation lies a quiet truth. Some mysteries resist being fully uncovered. The stones remember, the alignments persist, and the sky still traces the same slow arcs that guided ancient hands. Even now, something remains just beyond certainty. When you read a Sumerian myth for the first time, the stories appear straightforward. Gods shaping destinies, councils debating fate, floods rising and receding. But when you sit with the texts a little longer, letting each line unfold gently, something hidden begins to take shape beneath the surface. The cuneiform signs themselves, pressed into clay with styluses barely a centimeter wide, contain layers of symbolic meaning. Some signs represent sounds, others ideas, and some capture entire concepts tied to cosmology. The myths behave the same way. Each narrative works on multiple levels at once, revealing connections between human life, celestial cycles, and unseen forces shaping existence. Perhaps these layers were meant to be understood gradually through ritual repetition. Or perhaps they were designed to preserve meanings that only certain initiates could access. Across surviving tablets, motifs repeat with quiet persistence. The sacred tree appears beside celestial symbols. Serpents coil around boundary stones. Winged beings guide kings through shadowed thresholds. None of these images stand alone. They form networks of association, linking seasons to agricultural patterns, linking storms to divine moods, linking life cycles to the movements of stars. Archaeologists find traces of pigment on limestone plaques, suggesting that symbols once glowed with vivid color. Blues derived from crushed lapis, reds from ochre, whites from powdered gypsum. Under lamplight, these pigments would shimmer softly, their hues shifting as flames flickered. Imagine how this would feel inside a temple chamber, where the air remained cool and still, where each sound echoed gently off polished walls. Symbolism becomes experience. What if the Sumerians encoded instructions in these images? Not literal commands, but guidance. Scholars point out that the sacred tree often stands between two deities, suggesting balance, mediation, or the flow of life between realms. The serpent, sometimes depicted with human features, might represent transformation or cyclical renewal. The winged beings, often misinterpreted as otherworldly visitors, more likely symbolize authority, protection, or connection between mortal and divine. But even mainstream explanations acknowledge that these images carry more meaning than can be captured in a single interpretation. Maybe the Sumerians intended multiple readings. Maybe they trusted future generations to find meaning suited to their own times. Beneath temples and palaces, excavations have revealed caches of objects whose purpose remains uncertain. Small stone discs with precise concentric circles carved into them. Copper rods nearly 40 centimeters long, aligned in bundles. Clay tablets with incomplete inscriptions buried intentionally under thresholds. Some archaeologists interpret these objects as ritual foundation deposits meant to bless the structure. Others propose they formed part of measurement systems or ceremonial instruments. The discs, for example, might have been used to track lunar visibility cycles. The copper rods might have served as vibrational tools for testing stability or acoustics. The ambiguity invites curiosity. What if these buried items represent an unseen ritual, technology, a way of anchoring symbolic meaning into the structure itself? Cylinder seals offer another window into hidden dimensions. When rolled across soft clay, they left repeating patterns showing divine encounters, cosmic battles, or scenes of kingship. But their arrangement often reveals deeper logic. Figures are spaced evenly, suggesting rhythmic storytelling. Background symbols align in sequences that correspond to lunar phases or seasonal transitions. The images, in other words, behave like visual calendars. Scholars debate the extent of intentional encoding. Some argue it reflects artistic convention. Others see deliberate astronomical mapping. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Perhaps Sumerian artisans understood that story, symbol, and time formed a single continuum. Imagine holding one of these seals in your hand. It feels cool and dense, usually made from serpentine, hematite, or lapis lazuli. Its surface carries grooves no thicker than a grain of sand. When you roll it gently across moist clay, you feel slight resistance, like the clay is breathing beneath your touch. The imprint emerges slowly, forming a scene where gods and humans coexist in fluid hierarchy. This tactile experience reveals something about Sumerian thought. Meaning wasn't bound to the image alone. It lived in the act of creation, in the repetition of symbols, in the quiet patience needed to observe how patterns unfolded. Modern analysis adds new layers of understanding. Astronomers map star positions onto mythic scenes, finding unexpected alignments. Linguists trace the evolution of divine names across centuries, uncovering shifts in emphasis and interpretation. Digital imaging reveals faded pigment traces on statues and temple plaques, suggesting once vivid symbolic environments. Yet with every discovery, uncertainty persists. What meanings have been lost in translation? Which symbols held personal resonance for ancient viewers? Which served civic, ritual, or astronomical roles? Even now, the myths seem to whisper. They carry echoes of a worldview where humanity stood at the threshold of the seen and unseen, guided by stories that reflected cosmic cycles. Some interpretations root these layers in psychological insight. Others point toward ancient attempts to describe forces not yet understood. And a few, the most speculative, imagine messages left intentionally for future ages. But no matter which lens you choose, one truth remains steady. The symbols continue to speak through silence, through stillness, through the patience of clay that outlives entire civilizations. These hidden dimensions do not resolve into a single meaning. They offer possibilities, shifting, expanding, inviting reflection. And in that openness, the myths retain their power, holding on to secrets shaped by hands that understood how deeply meaning can hide beneath the surface of story. When you look closely at Sumerian artifacts, there is a humility to their form that hides how advanced they truly were. A simple clay tablet, no more than 2 centimeters thick, carries mathematical systems capable of predicting celestial cycles. A baked brick, shaped by hand and dried beneath desert sun, aligns with astonishing precision to astronomical markers. Even the reed stylus, with its triangular tip, becomes a quiet instrument of engineering, philosophy, and cosmology. And beneath all these objects lies an unseen layer, a kind of ancient technology built not from metal or gears, but from pattern, precision, and patience. Perhaps the Sumerians understood that the most enduring innovations are the ones that require no moving parts at all. Across excavated workshops in Ur and Lagash, archaeologists have found calibration marks etched into stone slabs. These marks, spaced at intervals of 3 to 5 millimeters, appear to correspond to measurement standards used in surveying temple foundations. The slabs themselves, made from limestone or basalt, retain faint signs of repetitive use, as if craftsmen spent hours testing angles, weights, and proportions. The quiet, focused work that once filled these workshops still lingers in the air, a kind of intellectual residue. Some scholars argue these tools reflect simple planning methods. Others suggest they indicate a hidden system of geometric knowledge. What if these calibration techniques allowed builders to encode cosmic ratios into architecture? What if these unseen standards formed the backbone of structures meant to mirror celestial order? Consider the bitumen-laced mortar used to bind bricks together. When heated, bitumen emits a distinct resinous smell, thick and earthy, rising gently as workers applied it to foundation layers. Tests show that Sumerian mortar maintained water resistance far beyond what was expected for the period, allowing ziggurats and canal systems to remain stable for centuries. Beneath this simple material lies a kind of early engineering chemistry, one that balanced heat, evaporation, and mineral content with surprising sophistication. Perhaps this was not framed as technology in their time, but it reveals a quiet intelligence shaped through generations of experimentation. Even more intriguing are the enigmatic objects found buried beneath temple thresholds: stone cones with tapered points, gypsum discs carved with deep spirals, and copper rods arranged in sets of 3 or 5. These items, often placed in ritual foundation deposits, show no signs of practical use. And yet their shapes invite interpretation. Some researchers propose they symbolize stability or protection. Others believe they may have served acoustic or vibrational functions within the broader structure. What if these objects acted as tuning elements, helping to regulate resonance inside temple chambers? Or what if they encoded symbolic meaning designed to activate only during specific rituals? The evidence is fragmentary, but the unanswered questions remain, compelling. Imagine standing inside an inner sanctuary during a ritual. A faint amber glow from oil lamps flickers against polished brick. The chamber feels cooler than the air outside, its silence deep and softened by clay walls that mute each step. In this space, a priest may place a copper rod along a marked line etched into the floor, listening as it vibrates gently against the surface. The tone is barely audible, more sensation than sound, but the act itself, measured, intentional, reflects a worldview where material and meaning are inseparable. Maybe these rituals encoded knowledge about balance, proportion, or cosmic order. Maybe they simply reinforced a sense of harmony that guided the community. The tablets themselves form another hidden technology. Baked at temperatures reaching 600, 800 degrees Celsius, they become nearly indestructible. Their inscriptions preserve data we can still read today: astronomical cycles tracked across decades, water management systems recorded with precise quantities, hymns encoded with layered symbolism. A single tablet might contain instructions for canal repairs, mathematical calculations using base 60 systems, and a prayer invoking celestial forces. This blend of practicality and spirituality reveals a sophisticated mental universe. What if the enduring power of clay, its ability to outlast empires, was part of the message? What if the Sumerians relied on permanence as their medium for communicating with futures they could only imagine? Modern science adds further depth to these mysteries. Infrared imaging exposes faint inscriptions hidden beneath surface scratches. Digital elevation models reveal temple alignments that shift subtly across centuries, tracking variations in the horizon line due to environmental changes. Acoustic testing inside partially reconstructed chambers uncovers frequencies that resonate at 80 or 110 hertz, tones that calm the human nervous system. The overlap between engineering, ritual, and psychological effect remains an open question. Scholars debate, measure, and model these findings. And yet, beneath every conclusion remains a silent acknowledgement. The Sumerians knew something about environment, perception, and order that we are only beginning to rediscover. In the end, the hidden technologies of Sumer do not resemble modern inventions. They are rooted in clay, shadow, proportion, and intention, quiet tools for shaping experience. Perhaps the Sumerians believed that true power does not require spectacle. It requires endurance, meaning, and patience. And as we uncover more of their world, one truth continues to rise gently from beneath the dust. Some knowledge survives not because it was loud, but because it was quietly woven into the very foundations of their civilization. When we reach this point in the Sumerian story, the questions begin to feel larger than the ruins themselves. You can stand in a courtyard where bricks have long since eroded into muted earth tones, feel the faint warmth rising from the ground, and sense that something unspoken lingers beneath the surface. The myths of the Anunnaki describe beings who judge, instruct, and observe. The architecture reflects astronomical precision. The tablets preserve knowledge that still surprises modern scholars, and somewhere within these overlapping layers, a quiet invitation appears to ask what all of this was meant to express. Some scholars believe the Sumerians simply merged celestial observation with spiritual imagination. Others suggest the myths reflect memories of earlier cultural influences. But maybe, just maybe, the questions themselves are the enduring legacy. Across different academic fields, competing theories try to make sense of these patterns. Linguists emphasize the symbolic structure of the myths, noting how narrative repetition served ritual and educational functions. Archaeologists focus on material evidence, pointing out how brick sizes, foundation, alignments, and construction layers track predictable development across centuries. Astronomers highlight the precision of temple orientations, showing how builders integrated celestial cycles into ritual space. And yet, a few researchers imagine that these patterns hint at something broader, perhaps a worldview shaped by rare natural events, or even by distant cultural memory carried across generations. We may never know exactly how these influences converged. We may never recover the full intellectual landscape of ancient Sumer, but the act of considering these possibilities brings us closer to their mindset. One enduring mystery revolves around the role of the Anunnaki inside Sumerian cosmology. Their names appear on tablets associated with kingship, agricultural cycles, and celestial governance. Some scholars believe this reflects the hierarchical structure of early city-states, where councils of elders determined policy. Others suggest the stories may encode astronomical cycles, with each deity corresponding to a planetary body or star group. A few imagine that the myths preserve distant memories of migrations or encounters with unfamiliar cultures. Perhaps the Sumerians shaped these stories to express experiences that lacked simpler language. Perhaps they designed myth to hold truths that could not be reduced to single explanations. And maybe they expected each generation to reinterpret the stories as needed. Another question emerges in the realm of technology. How did a civilization using copper tools create structures aligned within fractions of a degree to celestial markers? Some suggest the answer lies in systematic observation and patient measurement. Others propose the use of surveying tools whose wooden components have not survived. A few wonder whether these techniques draw upon older, forgotten knowledge inherited from pre-Sumerian cultures along the Gulf or highlands. We may never know the origins of these methods. The evidence remains partial, the timeline uncertain. But the precision itself speaks clearly. The Sumerians were deeply committed to understanding their place within cosmic order. That alone is a kind of answer. Cross-cultural patterns deepen the mystery. In Egypt, temples align with solstices and star risings, In the Indus Valley, city plans follow geometric grids. In early China, astronomical observation shapes imperial ritual. These civilizations emerged independently, separated by geography and language. And yet they all looked upward, searching the sky for meaning. Did they share a common impulse, one rooted in human nature? Or did ancient travelers, traders, or storytellers carry fragments of knowledge across vast distances? Some scholars believe the similarities reflect parallel development. Others hint at ancient interconnectedness. Perhaps both views hold truth. And perhaps the mystery remains because the ancient world was more fluid, more dynamic than our surviving evidence reveals. Even the material medium, clay, invites questioning. Why choose tablets that, once fired, become nearly eternal? Why press symbols so meticulously into surfaces meant to outlast generations? Some scholars argue clay was simply abundant. Others see intentional durability. A few imagine that the Sumerians understood how fragile cultural memory can be, and how essential it is to preserve patterns for those who will come later. Maybe the permanence of clay served as quiet reassurance, a way of saying, what we learned should not vanish. We may never know whether this was conscious design or practical habit, but the result remains. Their question survived because the medium did. Imagine standing at the base of the ziggurat at Ur at twilight. The sky shifts into muted shades of violet. The wind carries faint grains of sand across the ancient pavement. You feel the imprints of thousands of footsteps beneath your own, traces of people who lived, worked, questioned, and wondered. They asked about origins, they asked about purpose, they asked how the world should be ordered, and they used stories, rituals, architecture, and astronomy to explore those questions. Maybe they did not seek final answers. Maybe they believed the act of inquiry was itself sacred. As we reflect on these layered mysteries, a gentle clarity emerges. Some questions endure because they are meant to. They hold space for humility, for curiosity, for imagination. They remind us that understanding isn't always the destination. Sometimes it is the path we walk slowly, listening for echoes beneath clay and sky. And in that shared wondering, we find ourselves connected to those ancient hands that shaped the first stories of the Anunnaki, stories that continue to whisper across millennia. When you sit with the Sumerian record long enough, a strange shift begins to happen. The questions stop feeling like inquiries we direct toward the past and start feeling like questions the past quietly directs toward us. You can hold a clay tablet in your hands, its surface cool and dense, the wedge-shaped signs pressed with deliberate care, and sense that the people who made it were reaching beyond their own time. Perhaps they wondered how future generations would interpret their myths. Maybe they expected misunderstandings, or perhaps they trusted that meaning, like clay itself, would endure through pressure and fire. In these moments, the boundary between observer and observed softens, and the ancient world feels closer than we expect. Among the most debated mysteries is the origin of the Anunnaki concept itself. Some scholars believe these figures evolved from earlier deities, once tied to natural forces. Others suggest the Anunnaki reflect social memory of powerful ancestors or early rulers mythologized across generations. A few imagine the stories preserve fragments of encounters with migrating peoples whose appearance and customs seemed extraordinary. Each theory carries weight, yet none explains the full complexity of the myths. Perhaps the Anunnaki were never meant to represent a single idea. Perhaps they were composite beings, expressions of cosmic order, social structure, and ancestral memory woven together. And maybe the multiplicity is the message. We may never know their original identity with certainty. Questions also emerge around the flood narrative, found in both the Eridu Genesis and later Mesopotamian texts. The Sumerians place this event at the heart of cosmic reordering, describing how the Anunnaki deliberated before allowing the waters to rise. Geologists identify major flooding events in the region around 3000 to 2800 BCE, caused by shifts in river channels and rising sea levels. Some scholars link these geological patterns to the myth, arguing that environmental upheaval became encoded in story. Others propose that the flood symbolized moral or societal reset rather than literal catastrophe. A few speculate about ancient oral traditions carried from even earlier cultures affected by large-scale flooding. Maybe the myth is layered, geological memory beneath moral narrative, beneath cosmic symbolism. Maybe its persistence lies in its ability to hold multiple truths at once. Then there is the question of transmission. How did Sumerian ideas spread so widely across later cultures? Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and beyond. Some scholars cite political absorption. Others emphasize cultural prestige. A few imagine a deeper resonance, where certain narratives tap into universal cognitive patterns. Perhaps stories of divine councils mirror human governance. Perhaps myths of cosmic order reflect innate desire for structure. Or perhaps the stories carried echoes of events or experiences so impactful that they transcended linguistic boundaries. We may never fully reconstruct how knowledge flowed through ancient networks. But the spread itself suggests that Sumerian thought touched something essential in the human mind. Imagine walking through the ruins of Eridu, often considered one of the earliest cities. The ground beneath your feet holds layers of habitation extending back to the 6th millennium BCE. The air feels quiet, subdued, even in daylight. Bits of pottery scatter across the surface, their textures rough against your fingertips. As you bend down to pick up a fragment, you become part of a long chain of observers. Archaeologists, travelers, and ancient residents who wondered about the world in ways both familiar and unfamiliar. The ruin does not answer your questions, yet it holds them patiently, as if waiting for you to shape them into something meaningful. Cross-cultural comparisons deepen the sense of wonder. Why do divine councils appear in so many early civilizations? Why do flood myths surface across continents with remarkable similarity? Why do astronomical alignments show up in temples from Sumer to Egypt to Mesoamerica? Some scholars see coincidence. Others point to shared human responses to natural cycles. A few imagine ancient exchanges of knowledge through long-distance trade routes. And maybe, in ways we cannot measure, stories travel more easily than objects, carried by memory rather than commerce. We may never know how much of this interconnectedness is historical and how much is psychological, but the pattern invites reflection. Modern technology adds layers to these questions. Satellite imagery reveals settlement patterns invisible from the ground. Linguistic models reconstruct proto-languages that may connect Sumerian myths with older oral traditions. Astronomical simulations show how the night sky appeared thousands of years ago, restoring alignments long lost. These tools illuminate parts of the puzzle, yet the core mysteries remain intact. And perhaps that is appropriate. Maybe ancient knowledge survives not because it is complete, but because it leaves space for interpretation. As we reflect on these lingering uncertainties, a gentle insight emerges. The unanswered questions are not failures of evidence. They are reminders of humility. They suggest that ancient people, like us, stood beneath vast skies and wondered about their place within patterns too large to fully grasp. And in that shared wondering, across thousands of years, we feel a quiet connection, a recognition that some mysteries endure because they help us remember our limits, our curiosity, and our belonging within a world still filled with unknowns. When we look at Sumer today, we see fragments, worn bricks softened by wind, tablets cracked along ancient fault lines, ziggurat foundations rising only a few meters above the plain. Yet within these remnants survives a memory so resilient that it still shapes our understanding of humanity's earliest chapters. The Sumerians preserved their world through clay, myth, repetition, and ritual, leaving behind a legacy that traveled across cultures long after their cities faded. Even now, as archaeologists brush dust from inscribed tablets in the quiet of museum labs, we witness how their stories continue to breathe. Their memory did not vanish when their temples collapsed. It endured because they wove meaning into everything they touched. The most remarkable part of this legacy is not just what they wrote, but how they wrote. A tablet fired at 700-degree Naseredeo becomes nearly indestructible, resisting humidity, insects, erosion, even fire. This durability allowed Sumerian myths, laws, astronomical cycles, and personal letters to survive long after libraries of papyrus or parchment vanished. The wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay carry rhythms of thought that still pulse beneath our fingertips. Scholars today translate them using digital imaging, tracing fissures only millimeters deep, discovering variants of myths that were copied for centuries. Even now, new tablets emerge from excavations, each one adding a detail, a nuance, a quiet correction to the tapestry of understanding. Modern rediscovery began in the mid-19th century, when explorers like Austin Henry Layard uncovered the great libraries of Nineveh and the ruins of older cities beneath them. As workers lifted tablets from the soil, still faintly warm from the sun, early scholars realized they were holding a world forgotten for nearly 2 millennia. Many of those tablets contained Sumerian stories preserved by later cultures, a chain of memory stretching across empires. When George Smith read the flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh to the British Museum audience in 1872, the world felt a shock ripple outward. Even now, that moment echoes through the study of ancient civilizations. It reminded us that memory can sleep in silence for ages, waiting for the right hands to awaken it. Archaeologists working today use tools the Sumerians could never have imagined. Ground-penetrating radar reveals hidden building phases beneath temple mounds. Satellite imagery traces faint outlines of irrigation, canals stretching for kilometers. Chemical residue analysis identifies the contents of ancient storage vats. And even now, new insights emerge. A buried wall that hints at urban expansion, a fragment linking 2 long-separated myths, a seal impression with star patterns aligned to a sky model reconstructed from 3000 BCE. Modern technology does not replace ancient memory. It collaborates with it. The clay speaks, and the instruments help us listen more closely. Much of Sumer's legacy lives within language itself. Words like Ur, Ki, Lugal, and Dingir migrated into later languages, carrying semantic shadows across time. Even today, echoes remain in Akkadian texts, Hebrew narratives, Greek interpretations, and Arabic place names. The concept of divine councils, cosmic order, and celestial law appears in multiple cultures, forming bridges that scholars still trace patiently. Perhaps these similarities emerged independently. Perhaps they reflect shared human patterns. Or maybe, in ways we still do not fully grasp, Sumer planted seeds that continued to grow across continents and centuries. Even now, linguistic analysis uncovers faint threads reconnecting us to those earliest storytellers. There is also a quieter legacy, one shaped not by writing, but by worldview. The Sumerians believed the world required balance. They saw life as a collaboration between earthly labor and cosmic rhythm. They understood time not as a straight line, but as a cycle of planting and harvest, rise and fall, forgetting and remembering. That rhythm still resonates today. When we mark solstices, study the stars, tell origin stories, or seek meaning beyond immediate experience, we participate in patterns that stretch back to those earliest city builders. Even now, under the same night sky they watched, we continue to search for orientation. What fascinates researchers is how much remains undiscovered. Beneath the modern city of Dakar, ground scans reveal layers of the ancient metropolis of Ur that are still untouched. New fragments of myths appear every few years, providing alternative endings, expanded dialogues, or revised genealogies. Even now, archaeologists debate site functions, ritual sequences, and architectural symbolism. The legacy is not static. It is a living field of inquiry, shifting gently with each uncovering of clay or reconsideration of evidence. And perhaps that dynamism reflects the mindset of the Sumerians themselves, a willingness to revisit stories, reinterpret symbols, and evolve understanding. Remembering and forgetting move in cycles. A city falls, a tablet survives, a myth fades, then reappears through excavation. A name vanishes, then is spoken again thousands of years later. This rhythm mirrors celestial cycles the Sumerians charted so carefully. Stars setting, stars returning. Even now we live within that same cosmic pattern. Maybe this is why their world feels strangely familiar. It asks not that we master it, but that we listen. Listen to the clay. Listen to the stories. Listen to the questions that remain. And as we do, something quiet unfolds. A bridge forming between ancient and modern minds. The legacy of Sumer is not just history. It is continuity, written in materials that endure and ideas that refuse to fade. And even now, as we search for meaning beneath dust and time, we become part of the story they began. When you return, gently, from the long journey through Sumer's memory, the first thing you notice is the quiet. Not an empty or vacant quiet, but a settled one, the kind that gathers around old places where time has softened every edge. Imagine standing once more on the plain where the ziggurat of Ur rises against the horizon. The air feels mild in the evening, carrying traces of clay dust and reed water. Nothing moves quickly here. The wind drifts in slow patterns, brushing across your skin with the same calm rhythm it held thousands of years ago. Even now, the ground beneath your feet remembers the weight of ancient footsteps. As you breathe, the vastness of the sky settles around you. The stars appear gradually, one by one, as if they are taking their time to wake. These are the same stars the Sumerians watched, the same constellations they wove into myths, the same slow-turning heavens they used to measure seasons and meaning. The continuity is almost startling. Civilizations rise, shift, vanish. But the night sky keeps its patient arc. It whispers the same quiet truths. It holds its distance with gentle composure. And even now, it watches with the same unwavering calm. In this stillness, the unanswered questions no longer feel demanding. They are simply part of the landscape, like river reeds bending toward water, like bricks settling deeper into the earth with each passing century. Some mysteries endure because they are meant to. Perhaps the Sumerians knew this. Maybe that is why their myths feel open-ended, why their symbols invite interpretation, rather than insist on certainty. The stories do not close a door. They leave it ajar, allowing time, experience, and quiet contemplation to drift through. We do not need final answers to feel connected to them. Knowing that some threads remain loose is enough. Let your senses rest here for a moment. Feel the ground's subtle warmth from the day's fading sun. Hear the muted rustle of distant reeds. Smell the faint minerals carried from the river. Everything blends softly, forming a stillness that asks nothing from you except presence. Even now, the ruins hold their own kind of peace. Not sorrow, not longing, just acceptance. Stone stands where stone can stand. Clay crumbles where clay must crumble. The world continues its gradual turning, carrying memory without urgency. When you step back from the ruins in your mind, the quiet comes with you. The Sumerians are not gone in any absolute sense. Their stories, their questions, their attempts to understand the world, all of it lingers. It moves gently through the present, reshaping how we see ourselves. Every time we look at the night sky, or ask where meaning comes from, or wonder about the foundations of human imagination, their influence returns. Even now, their memory breathes through the silence. And so the story settles, not with an ending, but with a continuation. The wind still moves over the old foundations. The stars still observe with the same unhurried gaze. The stone still remembers what hands once shaped. And somewhere within that quiet, the ancient world continues.